I'm back with a new series, a limited series if you will. While films based on DC Comics have been around for decades, for a long period of time, there were no live-action films in which the characters crossed over. Warner Bros. Put together various plans, many including Batman and Superman crossing over, but none came to be. Until the 2010s, when they released a Superman reboot titled Man of Steel, and a follow-up Batman reboot titled Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. From then until 2023, there were 13 more films released in this shared universe, titled the DC Extended Universe, to varying degrees of success. Some films were critical flops, some films were financial flops, some films were both, and some were neither. And although this franchise has come to an end, and been rebooted by James Gunn and Peter Safran, the question arises, is the DCEU, as a whole, a bad franchise? Well, in this series, I'll be looking at all 15 DCEU films, that's including the Snyder Cut and not the Whedon Cut, giving my thoughts on them individually, and then weighing them all up in terms of continuity, consistency in tone, and character development, and whether rebooting the franchise was the right decision. As I will cover the films in order of release date, it only makes sense to start with Man of Steel. So, here we go. Released in 2013, Man of Steel was the first film in the DCEU, and starred Henry Cavill in the titular leading role. You might wonder why I didn't refer to him as Superman, but I will get to this. An origin story for Superman, it sees alien Kal-El being sent from his home planet Krypton to Earth, and growing up to make the decision to help protect the world, which puts him into conflict with the last of his species, General Zod and his crew, who want to repopulate the Kryptonian species, even if it means wiping out the human race. Man of Steel is a more serious take on Superman than previous versions. If you're looking for a cheerful, upbeat film equivalent to Christopher Reeve smiling with his hands on his hips as he flies into the sunset, this may not be the film for you. However, this doesn't mean there isn't merit to it, and I'm going to get into the many things I love, and few things I dislike, about it. The film is very well set up, establishing Krypton being endangered, and Zod and Kal-El's father Jor-El having clashing ideas on how to save their race. To ensure his safety, Jor-El infuses Kal-El with the genetics codex, before sending him to Earth in a very poignant moment. For roughly the next 40 minutes of the film, we get a non-linear narrative, in which the story goes forward, while we learn about Kal-El's history. As a child, Kal-El landed in Kansas, was adopted by Jonathan and Martha Kent, and named Clark. As a child, Clark is shown to be overwhelmed by his powers, and not knowing how far they can go, and is seen as a freak. This scene in which he is able to see through everyone is not only really well edited, but also has a wholesome follow-up scene in which Martha gets Clark to come out of the closet, literally not figuratively, and showcases the superb performances from both Diane Lane and Cooper Timberline, as well as the wholesome relationship between the characters, which continues to be just that over the course of the film. As someone who is autistic, I also feel a connection with Clark being overwhelmed by so much happening at once, and how his reactions are seen as quote-unquote weird by others. Clark's relationship with Jonathan is quite a polarising aspect of the film, but I think it works really well with showcasing the conflicts Clark faces during his life, regarding whether or not he should save certain people. The conflict that comes with saving the kids on the school bus, and Jonathan telling him what could happen if he exposes his powers too early, showcases this very effectively. Jonathan also shows Clark the ship he came from, and the codex that came with it, making Clark realise he came from a different planet. Jonathan tells Clark he'll have to make a choice when he's older about whether or not to protect the world. This also results in Clark not fighting back against bullies, not only for the sake of keeping his powers secret, but also not wanting to hurt those who are physically weaker than him. Years later, Jonathan dies in a tornado as a result of refusing Clark's help. Jonathan still believed the world wasn't ready for Clark to expose his powers, and thus, saving Jonathan could have exposed his powers too early, thus making Clark an outcast even earlier, which is something he explains to Lois later on. It was also an early way of showing Clark that he couldn't save everyone. Following this, Clark travels the world under different aliases, seeking a purpose in life, and saving people in different ways along the way. Not only does it showcase Clark trying to save people without exposing himself, but it also has a scene where he emerges from fire without burning, which furthers my belief that we need a Deadpool and Wolverine spin-off about the Cavalry. At one point, Clark comes into conflict with a sadistic creep, and contemplates fighting back, but the woman being harassed convinces him not to. This showcases how Clark has inner thoughts of aggression, but chooses to restrain himself when he has the chance to, and with the advice of humans. This shows that while Clark is dedicating his life to helping people, certain people are also helping him to maintain his own sense of humanity in subtle ways. This shows that while Clark is trying to be heroic, he's not perfect, which makes him so much more interesting and relatable. And while this film is primarily serious, it has a funny moment every so often. As the creep leaves the bar, we see that Clark destroyed his truck. This genuinely made me laugh. An additional note is that it looks a bit like Optimus Prime. Let's be thankful Michael Bay wasn't involved, or this film would likely be action and explosions without emotional weight. But Clark's parents are not the only people he has emotionally gripping connections with. And with that, let's head to the next lane of praise. Eventually, journalist Lois Lane is assigned to investigate the discovery of a Kryptonian scout ship in the Arctic. Clark finds the ship and learns from its artificial intelligence, modelled after Jor-El.
Who are you?
I am your father.
About his origins, and that he was sent to Earth to help guide its people. Clark wears a blue and red uniform provided by the ship, which represents him choosing to help the residents of Earth, even though he's not yet at the point of embracing his role. The scene where he learns to fly feels like a genuine triumph, with the music, editing, cinematography and effects shining through. Lois discovers the aliens and wants to write a piece on it, only for her boss Perry White to dispute it, which is foreshadowing of the danger humans will face later on. In a lot of adaptations of the Superman story, Lois doesn't know Clark is Superman, and in a lot of cases where she does, Superman finds a way to erase it from her memory, however absurd it may be. Here, she figures it out very quickly, which brings something new and intriguing to their relationship, and initially considers exposing Clark and Kal-El as the same. She convinces Clark not to keep hiding, as this will prevent him from saving people. Clark explains to her that revealing himself would have made him an outcast, telling her about Jonathan's sacrifice, which convinces her to drop her story. Following Zod and his crew's escape from the Phantom Zone, Clark surrenders himself to the US military for Lois' safety, which strengthens their relationship and shows her belief in him and his regard for her safety. We also get a funny moment where Clark notes that he can see Emil's ID tag and half-eaten roll in his pocket. A lot of people interpret Lois as a damsel in distress, but in these films, she does save Superman quite a few times, and really does represent the key that Flash told Bruce about in Batman v Superman. In this film, not only does she refrain from exposing Clark and Kal-El as the same, but she also uploads the codex into the machine, thus giving her the ability to interact with Jor, and saving Clark. Later on, Jor's message to Clark about how he can save everyone makes him realise he can save Lois from the falling pod. So in that sense, Clark and Lois save each other. But, unfortunately, Clark couldn't save everyone. To me, General Zod is a great villain, and Michael Shannon plays him very well. His motivation to keep the Kryptonian race alive, and remorse over killing Jor-El, makes him empathetic. But wanting to keep the Kryptonians alive at the expense of humans is what makes him a villain. His transmitted message to the humans, ordering them to hand over Kal-El, is also genuinely suspenseful. We see the scene in which the young Clark is bullied and trying to refrain from fighting back. These years of being an outcast and developing uncertainty of trust in humanity give Clark a conflict when Zod demands humans hand him over. He speaks to a priest about the conflict, saying he can't maintain full trust in Zod or in humanity, and the priest advises him to make his own choice. It gives a good message about how you should do what you believe is right, rather than following the herd, but it also furthers how Clark is seeking aid in his human side. People are generally divided over Superman being a Jesus allegory in these films, and I do think it's a bit too on the nose at times, such as the stained glass mural of Jesus in the background. But, as a whole, I think it works for this take on Superman, and the way it's expanded on in Zack Snyder's subsequent DCEU films. It's also worth noting that Superman in the Christopher Reeve films was also written as an allegory for Jesus. I'm not sure if it's been explicitly confirmed, so don't take it as fact. But there is common discussion that Superman's creation was partly inspired by Moses, the Hebrew prophet who led the Jews out of Egypt. Both were placed in something to ensure their survival as an infant, they were adopted by people who were not like them, and grew up to use their powers to ensure the safety of innocent people, while having ties to where they came from, and where they grew up. In this film, Clark comes off as both an allegory of Moses, and an allegory of Jesus. I think it's fitting on account of how both Moses and Jesus were Jewish, as were Superman's creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Here, much of Clark's backstory has parallels with Moses, but his consideration of sacrificing himself for the safety of humanity has parallels with Jesus, and these will come further into play in the subsequent films. During Clark's fights with Zod, a lot of destruction is caused. This has been the subject of criticism, but I'd argue that, at this point, he's less experienced, and 99% of the destruction is caused by Zod and his army. During the final fight between Clark and Zod, Clark even goes out of his way to avoid crashing through buildings, showing that he is gradually figuring out how to fight Zod more safely moving along. When Zod tries to deploy his most powerful terraforming device, the World Engine, it severely damages Metropolis and risks humanity's extinction. Clark destroys the platform while the military launches an attack on the Black Zero, sending Zod's troops back to the Phantom Zone. Believing he has no purpose due to there being no further possibility of saving the Kryptonian race, Zod engages in a fight with Clark. There's common criticism of Clark fighting Zod on Earth, rather than trying to take him far away. But Zod doesn't want to fight Clark in space, he wants to fight him in the city, where he can not only destroy Earth and the human race, but also, from doing just this, force Clark to kill him. Clark even tries to take Zod into space, but Zod sends them both back down to Earth. Then we get the most infamous moment in the film.
If you love these people so much, you can mourn for them. Never.
A lot of people condemn Superman killing, and I have a ton of questions about that. A. How do you respond to Superman killing Zod, while smiling, in Superman 2, compared to Superman reluctantly killing Zod due to having no choice, in Man of Steel? B. Some say that Superman should have covered Zod's eyes, but if that happened, he'd have less strength to restrain Zod, giving him a better chance of overpowering Superman. C. Some say Superman shouldn't be written into situations where he's forced to kill. Well, firstly, how do you respond to the ending of The Dark Knight, where Batman is forced to kill Harvey Dent, and with a firmly established no-kill rule no less? And secondly, if you wanted Superman to never be forced to make difficult decisions, wouldn't that make him much more boring? I also think it's interesting, because it showcases further character development for Clark. He initially refrained from killing people because he didn't have to, but in this moment, Clark realizes that he has to kill Zod, and that he can't always exercise restraint in confronting enemies. After this very difficult decision, Lois arrives and consoles Clark. At this point, one of the only two people tying Clark to Earth and his sense of humanity, along with his mother Martha. If these two people get killed, Clark could go down a dangerous path. And believe me, he's not the only one. The film ends with Clark adopting the superhero alias of Superman, and persuades the government to let him act independently, on the condition he doesn't turn against humanity. For increased chance of investigating dangerous situations, he becomes a reporter for the Daily Planet. While a polarising film among many, I personally loved Man of Steel. It managed to do something different with Superman, that, in my opinion, managed to be very emotionally gripping, and showcased a believable depiction of Kryptonians in the real world, as well as a human and relatable depiction of Superman. I loved the cast, particularly Michael Shannon as General Zod. I loved Hans Zimmer's music, I loved the action scenes, and I loved the visual style. While the general response to DCEU films varies from film to film, I am looking forward to seeing what comes next. And chances are, I'll find the next one great too.